Billionaire dad chooses son over daughter. The unbelievable twist that no one saw coming. The golden hues of the evening sun sank slowly behind the horizon, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets of the town. David stepped through the front door, his arms laden with brightly wrapped gifts, a smile playing at the edges of his lips. He had always been a man of few words, but today he felt the excitement of a father who could finally give something back to his son. Paul, his youngest, rushed to meet him, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Dad, is that all for me?" Paul asked, his voice practically shaking with excitement as he reached for the packages. David chuckled softly, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "Yes, my boy, everything here is for you." But as Paul grinned, eager to dive into his new toys, he paused for a moment, his gaze flicking toward his sister, Sarah, who was standing silently by the doorway, watching them both with a mixture of curiosity and unease. "What about Sarah?" Paul asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. David's expression shifted in an instant. The warmth in his eyes faded as he turned toward Sarah. His tone was cold, dismissive. "Don't worry about her," he said flatly, waving his hand dismissively. "She'll get married one day, and then she won't belong to this family anymore. I'm not wasting money on a daughter who won't even carry my name." The harshness of David's words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating the room with an uncomfortable silence. Sarah's heart clenched. She had heard these words before, but each time they cut deeper. Tears threatened to well up in her eyes, but before they could fall, her mother, Agnes, was there, pulling her close into a warm embrace. "Don't cry, my love," Agnes whispered gently, smoothing Sarah's hair with the kind of tenderness that only a mother could provide. "One day, you'll show him he's wrong. You'll prove him wrong, I promise." Sarah wanted to believe her mother's words. She truly did. But how could she? Every day she watched her father pour affection, attention, and lavish gifts onto Paul. While she remained invisible in his eyes, he never asked about her day, never paid for her school fees, and certainly never showed any kind of interest in her aspiration. Sarah was the child he had overlooked, the one whose existence seemed to irritate him. As Paul played with his new toys that evening, laughing and calling to David, Sarah sat quietly in the corner. It wasn't the toys she wanted. What she longed for was something she could never seem to get: her father's love. Months passed, and as Paul prepared for his final college exams, David's confidence in his son grew. After all, he had given Paul everything he could possibly need: money, private tutors, and unwavering support. But when the results came in, David's world came crashing down. Paul had failed. The house was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then David's rage erupted like a storm, shaking the foundations of the family. "Paul," he roared, his voice thick with disbelief, "how could you fail after everything I've done for you, after everything I've given you?" Paul's head hung low, in shame. "Dad, I think I just don't have a passion for education. I try, but I learn slowly." "I'm sorry." David's eyes darkened, his voice low and menacing. "Nonsense. You're just lazy. I won't tolerate failure in this house. I'll hire another tutor, and you will pass next time. Do you understand me?" Agnes stepped in, placing a gentle hand on David's arm, her voice calm but firm. "David, maybe Paul's strengths lie elsewhere. Perhaps we should—" "Enough, Agnes," David snapped, his frustration boiling over. "I won't tolerate this nonsense. despite the extra lessons. Paul failed his exams again. That same evening, Sarah returned home, an envelope in her hands. She stood in the living room where her family sat in tense silence. The room was thick with the weight of disappointment, the silence almost unbearable. Sarah gripped the letter tightly, her heart pounding. In her chest, she had waited for this moment her entire life. The moment to prove herself to her father, to show him that she was more than just a girl who would marry into another family. "I got a scholarship," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "I was the best student in my school. They're sending me abroad to study." Agnes gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, my daughter, I knew you could do it." She rushed forward, pulling Sarah into a tight embrace, tears of joy streaming down her face. Paul, sitting beside their father, managed a small smile. "I'm happy for you, Sarah. You deserve it," he said quietly. But David sat frozen, his face unreadable, his fingers clenched around the armrest of his chair, his knuckles turning white. "How?" he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "How did you?" "I worked hard, Dad," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "Even without your support, I studied day and night. I had to prove that I was worth something." David's jaw tightened. His pride had been shattered. The son he had invested everything in had failed him, but the daughter he had ignored was now leaving for a better life. "I can't believe this," he muttered, shaking his head. "A girl getting a scholarship." Agnes's expression hardened. "A girl," she repeated, stepping toward her husband. "Sarah didn't get this scholarship because she's a girl. She got it because she worked harder than anyone else. Unlike you, David, I never doubted her." David's nostrils flared, but he said nothing. His silence spoke louder than words. The next few days were a whirlwind. Sarah prepared to leave for the airport, her heart heavy with both excitement and sadness. Agnes helped her pack, slipping small notes of encouragement between her clothes. On the day of departure, Paul hugged her tightly. "Take care, okay?" he whispered. "I will," Sarah promised. "And Paul, don't give up. You'll find your own path." Paul nodded, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling of failure. He had always been his father's pride, but now, after failing twice, he felt like a shadow behind Sarah's success. David, however, refused to come to the airport. He sat in his chair, staring at the wall, refusing to acknowledge his daughter's departure. As Sarah wheeled her suitcase to the door, she paused. "Goodbye, Dad," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. There was no response. With a final glance at her childhood home, she walked out, stepping into a future her father never believed she could have. The house felt emptier after Sarah left. Agnes noticed at first the unsettling silence, the absence of her daughter's laughter, the missing presence of someone who had once fought so hard to belong. But David, he acted as if nothing had changed. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Sarah, thousands of miles away, embraced her new life. The moment she stepped into the university in the United States, she felt a sense of freedom she had never known. She was no longer just David's unwanted daughter. She was Sarah, the best student, the scholar, the girl who had defied all odds. Back home, things were falling apart. Paul, once the golden child, struggled under the weight of his father's expectations. After failing his exams twice, he lost all motivation. He tried applying to other schools, but without good grades, his chances were slim. One evening, as David sat in his chair, staring blankly at the television, Paul finally gathered the courage to speak. "Dad," he said hesitantly. David didn't look away from the screen. "What is it?" "I don't think university is for me," Paul admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I learned slowly. Maybe I should try something else, a trade, a business." David snapped his head toward his son, his face contorted with rage. "A trade? A business? Are you saying you want to become a common laborer?" Paul swallowed hard. "Dad, I don't think I can keep disappointing you. I don't want to waste your money anymore." David slammed his fist against the table. "You are my son. You have no choice but to succeed. Do you think I worked hard all these years just to have a son who gives up?" Paul lowered his gaze. "But you never treated Sarah like this," he said softly. The words hit David like a slap. He stood up, his face red with anger. "Don't you ever compare yourself to that girl." He stopped himself, breathing heavily. That girl, Hannah, the daughter he had rejected, had risen higher than anyone had expected, and Paul, his beloved son, the one he had given everything to, was crumbling right before his eyes. That night, David sat in silence, staring at the framed photo of his children on the wall. For the first time in his life, doubt crept into his mind. Had he been wrong all along? Meanwhile, in the United States, Sarah was excelling in her studies. She had met professors who believed in her, friends who supported her, and mentors who saw her potential. But she never forgot where she came from. One night, as she lay in her dorm room, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Paul. "Hannah, I don't know what to do anymore. Dad is disappointed in me. I feel like a failure." Hannah's heart ached as she stared at the screen. Her father had created this mess, but could she help her brother escape it? Without hesitation, she called him. After a long conversation, Paul slowly began to realize that he didn't have to live for their father. He needed to live for himself. Weeks later, David sat alone, his mind clouded with regret. Finally, he typed a message to Sarah. "Hannah, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry." The reply came quickly. "Dad, I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to be here now." Weeks passed, and Paul was thriving in his new path. He enrolled in the technical school Hannah had found for him, studying engineering and mechanics with a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer driven by the weight of his father's expectations, but by the desire to follow his own path. For the first time in his life, Paul felt like he was on the right track. Agnes, who had always believed in him, watched proudly as her son finally started to find his own place in the world. But she knew there was still something unresolved: David's coldness, his pride, and the years of neglect towards Sarah. Agnes couldn't help but wonder if David would ever truly see what he had missed. Meanwhile, Sarah, now fully immersed in her studies and life abroad, felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had proven to herself and to everyone who had doubted her that she was capable of achieving greatness. But even with all her success, there was still something missing. Her heart longed for a connection with her father, a relationship that had been fractured for so long. One evening, as Sarah sat in her apartment, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her mother. "Agnes, David is asking about you. He wants to talk." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since she had heard anything from her father. Her immediate reaction was to shut the door on him. How could she forgive him for all the pain he had caused her, for the years of neglect, for never believing in her? But as the minutes passed, Sarah found herself staring at her phone, her thoughts torn between anger and the small flicker of hope she had carried in her heart for so long. Could he change? Could she even give him the chance to? With trembling fingers, Sarah sent a reply, "I'll talk to him, but only if he's willing to listen. I'm not the same girl he left behind." The phone call that changed everything next day, Sarah found herself sitting in her apartment, the phone resting on her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. When the call finally came, she answered it with a deep breath. "Hello," she asked, her voice uncertain. "Hannah," David's voice cracked, and for the first time in a long time, it sounded human, vulnerable. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how I treated you, how I pushed you away." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her emotions running wild. This wasn't the man who had rejected her for years. This was her father, finally acknowledging his mistakes. "I know I can never make up for the years I've lost, but I'm ready to try. I was wrong about you. You're not just my daughter. You're a remarkable woman, and I'm proud of you." The weight of his words hit her like a tidal wave. It felt surreal to hear him speak so honestly, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Finally, after a long pause, she said softly, "Dad, it's not about perfection. It's about being there, being a father, no matter what. But I need you to know, this isn't just for me. It's for us." David's voice broke again, and Sarah could hear the guilt and regret in his words. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you." The weeks following that phone call were filled with gradual change. David started reaching out, making small but significant efforts to reconnect. It wasn't easy, and there were still painful conversations, but with each step, the walls between them began to crumble. Back home, Paul, now focused on his studies and his new path, received a message from his sister. "Sarah, Dad is trying. He's really trying. Paul." Paul smiled, for the first time in years feeling a sense of relief. He finally understood that family wasn't about meeting expectations, it was about love, acceptance, and being there for one another. Months later, a special moment arrived. Sarah, after graduating with honors, decided to return home, not just to visit, but to reconnect with the family that had been torn apart for so long. On the day Sarah returned, there was no tension, no awkwardness. David was there, standing at the door with open arms, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I've been a fool," he said. For the first time in years, Sarah saw her father through new eyes, not the man who had ignored her, but the man who was trying to make things right. Sarah didn't have to say much. She walked up to him, her heart open, and embraced him tightly. It wasn't an immediate fix, it wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. That night, the family sat together at the dinner table for the first time in what seemed like forever. It wasn't a grand reunion, but it was real. It was the start of something new, a future they could build together. Paul, now pursuing his own dreams, sat beside Sarah and David, a feeling of peace settling in his heart. "We're still a family, right?" he asked quietly. "Yes, we are," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "And we always will be." Sarah and Paul continued their journey, Sarah building her career abroad, and Paul pursuing a future in engineering. David, though still proud of his son, now understood the value of nurturing both of his children equally in his own way. He learned that family was not about perfection, but about acceptance and growth. As the years passed, the family healed. There were still challenges, but now they faced them together. In the end, David learned the most important lesson of all. Love was not about giving everything to one child and nothing to the other. It was about understanding, support, and the willingness to grow alongside each other.